What's up, everybody? Today you're gonna learn how to build your weather application using React. First thing and the most important thing for you is just take it easy, especially if you're a beginner. I'm gonna do my best to teach you, to give you the concepts that you need to learn in order to start building your first applications using React. If you have questions, roadblocks, doubts, and you want to get some answers, well, just leave them in the section below in the comments. I would like to hear from you what you thought about the video, if it was helpful or not as well, and I'll do my best to answer all of those questions that you have. Well, too much talking. Besides that, once again, just take it easy and let's just get started building our first React application. But before we get moving forward with developing our React weather application, I'm gonna show you the step-by-step that we're gonna follow. We're gonna install the Create React App library first. Then we're gonna install Node Sass package in order for us to be able to use Sass files. This is just a different alternative for you to use CSS, but like a little bit with powers, additional powers that functionality you can use. Also, we're gonna start developing our create search bar component. Then we're gonna create our weather API using Open Weather Map. Also, we're gonna create our current weather component, our forecast weather component, and at the end we're gonna install our application. So something that I wanted to show you before we move forward is, if you're not very familiarized with the concepts of components, well, essentially libraries nowadays, React, Angular, or Vue.js, they are based on components. And components, one of the main things with components is that it allows you to reuse them across different pages, across different parts of application where you want to use them. In this example, we're talking about the search bar. And the search bar that you're seeing in here, it's a component. This current weather app or current weather component is going to be this section here where we're displaying the current weather. And also you're seeing this current or this hourly forecast, which is our forecast weather component. What happens with that is that with the components, as I mentioned before, we can reuse them. So simply by just copying the component and pasting it anywhere in our application, we simply can already have the same functionality, the same view, the same content of that particular component in just different parts of our application. To make it simpler for you to visualize it a little bit, what a component could be, we're gonna open our developer tools. So essentially these websites are based on this HTML syntax, right? And the HTML syntax is gonna contain the head and the body. Now, just to put it into perspective, or just to keep it simple, you will see here this section that is called search bar. At the moment of building the app, under the hood, React is just compiling and making it look as just regular HTML syntax, but in reality what we have is just a component. You will see here search bar, the current weather, forecast. And what I was saying is, if we could reuse the component over and over, so for example, you could just copy and paste it. Let me do it again. Copy and paste it anywhere within our application. You will see that we have the same component. But this is just a way to kind of like tell you, to represent what components are in React or any frameworks nowadays that are used in the UI. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna install Create React App library. That's gonna allow us to give us a jumpstart with our application. It's just gonna help us generate our default structure of React, the application in React, with all the libraries, all the configuration, the minimum configuration needed for you to run your application. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go to our terminal. In our terminal, just make sure you're located in the folder where you want to generate your application. In my case, it's the repos. You can be in the documents folder, you can be in the videos folder, whatever you want to be. And then the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna install globally Create React App. That's the first thing we're gonna do. Now the second thing we're gonna do is we're gonna create our React app. So we're gonna run this command, and essentially this is saying that we're gonna create a new React app with the name of my app. I don't want to call it my app, I want to call it weather app React. That's gonna be the name. And now what's gonna happen is gonna generate a project with React with all of the default configuration that we need to just focus on coding and not worry about configuring the whole application, scripts, and everything that you need to know in order to just run your app. Okay, perfect. Finally, it completed that process. Now we're just gonna change to our directory. Remember, we call it weather React or weather app in React. Now the first thing we're gonna execute is we're just gonna run the project, the default project. So we can just do npm run start. And perfect, you will see that our application in React is being loaded. There is your React application. Now the first thing we're gonna do now is just gonna go to our folder. We're gonna open that React weather app. Now we have our folder structure, and once you open your weather app in React, let's go to the app.js folder, and literally we can just find here what's being displayed right now. You can always type something in here. This is my first test, and as soon as you save it, I kind of like kill the terminal after opening this folder. So let me just run it, the project again one more time. And essentially what I want to tell you is React, the text changes made on the files literally reloads the page. So in this case, now that my project run again, you will see the change that I did. This is my first test. If I add more sections or more lines, I can type today another line of code, or not code, just another line. Just gonna save that, and you will notice that those changes were executed. Okay, so you notice that every time we're making change and we save it, the changes were executed, were reloaded by React, and it's just reloading, refreshing the page. That's just good. The first thing that I want to do is just remove this because we don't really need this anymore. So we're gonna remove this from this app. What you're seeing here, the app.js is a component. It is a functional component. If you notice, React usually starts with this. In order to start React application, we're gonna have to have this React DOM.render. And then we're just essentially call all of the components that we have, and then we're gonna place in on the element ID called root that we have defined in an index file. If we go to the public folder, you'll find this index.html file. Once you go there, you will see all of this default configuration in the index.html file, and you will see at some point you will see this div element containing this ID, and the ID is root. And that's exactly where our React application is gonna dump all of the components, starting with our app component. So if we go back into our folder structure, you will see that in the source folder, you will see this index.js file. The index.js file is just generating this document. This is just rendering the app component, and it's gonna place it within the index.html file containing the element containing the root ID. That's essentially what's happening in there. Now, one of the things that you will see in React is I'm gonna start talking about components over and over. And there are two different kinds of components in React. One of them is a functional component. And then you will see another one, which is gonna be a class component. And essentially, a functional component returns a template in itself. It doesn't have too much configuration. It doesn't have methods or functions inside the class that is used to manipulate the data, to have some logic, the internal logic that is gonna make changes on what kind of data is being displayed, for example, within your component. A functional component in itself, it just displays or returns a template. When I'm talking about template, this is just a template, just what is being rendered in the UI. Perfect. Now, since we have that, remember we need for our web application, we need to have a search bar. That's the first thing I want to have. What I'm gonna do is just go to my source folder and I'm gonna generate first my components folder. And inside the components folder, and you can just place your components anywhere. I just prefer to have this kind of a structure where I say that my components are gonna be in the components folder. So I'm gonna call this search bar.js, and in here we're gonna have our search bar component. But if we start taking a look at our step-by-step process, I cannot skip it already. We need to install Node Sass first in order for us to use Sass files. So essentially, we have these CSS files, and if we make changes, for example, to this app CSS file, we say I want to change the background to, let's say, to black or to white, and we refresh. The background color changes to white. Now, Sass files essentially are like CSS with powers, with superpowers. It allows you to give a little bit an extra functionality. But anyway, if you don't want to install it, you don't have to, but I would recommend you, because that's the kind of files I want to use, the CSS, the Sass files, to install the application. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna open a new terminal. Don't close. Make sure to not close the terminal where you're running your React application. You can just open a new terminal. In this case, I just click on the split button, or you can just simply click on the plus button to generate another terminal. And we're gonna install our Sass or Node Sass folder or package. So we're gonna install npm I or npm install, whichever way. And then we're gonna tell it that we're gonna save it in our package folder or package.json. That's another thing that I haven't taught. If you don't know, you are brand new to development. In our package.json, we're gonna be able to store scripts. We're gonna be able to store our dependencies and other extra configuration that we can have. What are the dependencies? The dependencies are just libraries that our application is depending on. In this case, by default, this React application is depending on this React scripts, React DOM library, this React library, Web Vitals library. It's depending on that. And you can always do an npm install and then install, for example, whatever package you want to install, and it will install it in your npm. But the problem is that it's not going to be stored, it's not going to be saved in your dependencies section. So what happens is that if I don't save it in here, and let's say somebody else clones my project and I want to start to install all of the packages, well, there are some packages that are going to be missing because I just installed them in my local computer, but I didn't store them in my dependencies. So what we're going to do is we're going to do double dash and then save. And in reality, this is not the right name. It's gonna be Node Sass, and you will see in a few seconds that our dependencies are gonna be updated with Node Sass. There it is. We're seeing Node Sass now. We're good there. Now that we did that, what we're gonna do is to quickly test if this works or not. We can just simply change our CSS file of our app.css file to a app.scss. We're gonna change it. Let's say we're getting some errors. Another thing that I might be missing here is that our app.js, our component app, it was dependent upon the CSS file, but we renamed this to SCSS file. So now that's what we're gonna use. I just refresh, everything is good. Let's make a change real quick. Let's change the background to, let's say, to red. We save and it gets updated perfectly. Now that step of the process is good to go. Perfect. The next step now is to create the search bar component. So the first thing I want to do is go ahead into the components. And previously I mentioned that you should create a search bar .js file. In here, we're going to store our component. Now, in here, we need to import first React in order to generate our class component. It's not going to be a functional component because it's going to have a little bit of more additional setup, and you will see in a few seconds. So just stick with me, just be patient. Then when you import packages from the dependencies that you install is using this syntax. In this case, we can say import everything with the asterisk sign, import everything from, and within quotes, you're gonna start typing the name of the package. In this case, is React. Now, you can also assign in the name. And in this case, I'm just gonna assign it to React, which is the common naming convention. Now, it's time to start building our class component. By doing that, we're gonna use our keyword class, and then we're gonna start naming our component search bar component. And essentially, this React is already a component, and we're just gonna leverage it. We're gonna leverage it by generating a new component with all of the functions that the React component already has, so we can use it in our components. In this case, in our class component. In this case, what we're gonna do is we're gonna use the keyword extends and do React.component. Once we have that, we have some default configuration that we can have access to. Among them, we can have the render function that comes with the React component. Now, here in the render function is when we return the template that we want to display in the UI. So for example, if I would like to return HTML in the UI, this is where we're gonna place it. And we're gonna place it by doing a return, and within parentheses, we're gonna open and close parentheses, and inside here, we're just gonna start adding some HTML. So for example, I'm gonna call this div, and let's say this is the search bar component. We're gonna save it. Now, the next thing what we're gonna do is we need to export this component so it's accessible for other files. Generally, React, you can just export anything by default. And in this case, by default, we're gonna export the search bar class component. I'm just gonna type here, this is a class component. And okay, now we're exporting that. If we go to our app.js file, in our app.js file, we can import that search bar, and we can do it and just start finding it. So we're gonna call it import everything from components, and then it's gonna be on the search bar. That's the location. We're gonna import a search bar component. Now inside here, we can use our search bar component. We can do it by opening the angle brackets, and then we're gonna start typing search bar, and then we're just gonna close it with the slash and then our closing bracket. Perfect. We save, and you will see that this is my search bar component is being loaded in my UI. What happens if I don't have anything here? Let's say that I'm just gonna comment this out, this whole function containing the render, and essentially it's gonna have errors. If you start taking a look, inspecting the browser, you're just gonna take a look, and it says that the search bar, which is a component, is telling us that it doesn't have a render method, which means that we need to have one in order to be able to render whatever is in the template for that component. So make sure you at least have this render method, render function, and once we have that, we're gonna be able to fix that issue and display the information out there. It's funny how it works, but you cannot have multiple elements like this way, like multiple sibling elements within your render function. You cannot return that. You can just have a main tag element wrapping up all of those tag elements, all of the content that you have, because if you start doing that, it's not gonna like it. Let's start saving it, for example, a second div, and let's say if it works, and it doesn't work. As it says here, JSON.js elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. So essentially what's telling us is that we just have to have a main parent element wrapping all of the subsequent elements in our search bar component or any React component essentially. Okay, enough of talking. Let's start building our form or our search bar, and we're gonna build it here. So first thing, now we're gonna have to have a button in our form, and our button is essentially gonna have, let's just call it search. This is where we're gonna search our cities, the city's weather, and this is gonna be a type of button of submit, not just gonna be a regular button. Also, we're gonna have an input element where we are gonna be able to search. We're gonna open our input element, and then we're gonna give it a name, attribute name of search. We're gonna give it also an ID, and let's call it search. Now that we have that, we're just good in here. Just gonna save that. Now we have our search button, we have our input, and here we're just essentially look for our cities. Generally, whenever we have components, we would like to render, display information, variable information that we have stored in our variables. So for example, this is a variable and we're just gonna create it a constant variable. Let's say it's gonna be my name. Let's type my name, save it. But then I also would like to be able to display my name or whatever content we have in our variable. In that way, we're gonna use string interpolation, and the way we do, we're able to display our information of our variables is by opening, closing curly braces, and then typing the variable name. We type it, and then you will see now that my name is being displayed. Just gonna remove our names, and then first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna build our constructor. We're gonna build our constructor, and then our constructor, we're just gonna add this super value, and this should contain props. We're gonna pass it onto our React component, and then we're gonna have something that in React is called states. States is where we can store information, and once that information is updated, it triggers this render function, which is gonna update this template with some information. So for example, just to make it simple, let's just generate this, or let's access that state value. You will see it here, and in here you can define any kind of values in here that you want to store in your state. So let's say I'm going to store my name one more time. Oh, let's make it more realistic. It's going to be the location, right? Because we need to find the location of the weather. So we're going to have our location, and in here we're going to have an empty value, and let's say I'm going to have a set interval. This is just for example purposes. You should not do that, but I'm just going to show you what happens whenever we update the state every time. We're gonna update it every second. But before updating every second, what I wanna do is I want to display that information, the location, in my template. So I'm gonna have variable called location, and this is gonna access the state. The state's gonna have this location, and let's say I'm gonna display this location in my template. We render. It's not displaying anything. If we just change the value of my location, it's updating the template and it's displaying. Now, I told you that whenever we update the location, what's gonna happen is that this is gonna get updated. It's gonna re-render again the template. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna just generate this simple set interval function. And what happens with set interval is that every second, in this case, we're gonna apply this set interval, and essentially what's gonna happen is that every amount of time, in this case every 1 second, we're gonna trigger this function, and in this function I want to update the state. But in React you don't update the state by accessing that property value of location and then doing this, like for example, let's say my new location. In React you don't do that. This is not gonna work, at least in order for you to re-render the template. We do this and nothing is happening. In theory, this should be executing every second. So let's just test it. Executing interval. And let's see that you're seeing here in my logs that every second I'm getting this log. So what's going on here? The location every second is being updated, and you told me that once the state gets updated, it triggers a rendering process. Yes, it's true. But how does it trigger it? It triggers by using the set state function. So if we use the set state function, and we open parentheses, and then we open curly braces, and then inside here, we're gonna find the location property, and we're gonna assign it a new value. In this case, my new value. We save it. And here now you're seeing that my new value is being displayed in the UI. So make sure that if you want to update or you want to re-render, this process of setting the state needs to happen in order to display some new information and in order to trigger this render function. So let's add those comments in here. Render function is triggered whenever setting or updating the state using the set state function. Now I'm gonna kill this because this is not needed. I don't need it anymore. Now what we're gonna do is I want to use the location, and that location property is the one that we're gonna use as the value for our input. So our input is gonna have a value of location. Whatever our location is, we save it and we start making changes. I'm literally typing in here and I'm not seeing that the changes are being executed. Why is that happening? Well, remember that the location, the state of the location needs to be updated using the set state function. So what we have to do is we need to be able to detect any kind of changes that are happening in the input tag element. Once that happens, we need to update the values that the user is inserting into the input. We update this location state. Once we update the location state, this is gonna re-render the template with the latest value that we assign. How do we do that? We need to use one of the events that gets triggered by the input. In this case, the onChange method. And then change method, we're gonna trigger a function that we're gonna have in our search bar component. We're gonna detect, or we're gonna call it on input change. And by default, what we're gonna have is we're gonna have an event. That's what usually happens. We're gonna have an event that is gonna be passed on to that method that we're gonna be calling. In order to call this input change method, we need to first, the onChange is gonna emit an event, which is gonna be determined with this, we're gonna call it E. And then we're gonna access this on input change method with this on input change. And inside here, we're gonna call it and pass that event. We're gonna do a simple test. And let's say calling on input change. We save. Let's start typing something, and you're noticing that on input change is being called in here in our logs. That's good. Now the next thing that what we're gonna do is we need to update our state location, because yes, it's changing. Is calling the on input change, but it's not happening. It's not updating my text. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna first identify what's the event, what kind of values we get on the event. Then we start typing, we get all of these informations, and we start scanning, taking a look at this. We get the current element or current target. Yes, we're gonna access the target, and the target should have value property. Value is empty. So let's see if we do something like this. We do target.value. I'm typing letter A, W, E. We got that. So the value is being stored in the E target value. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna set the state of the location, and we're gonna update it with the target value. Right? Update it with that, and that should, in theory, re-render template and with the updated values. So now I'm gonna type, this is a test, and perfect. Now we're seeing that our values are being rendered in our component. The first thing I wanna do is remove this location. We don't need it anymore. I just wanted to re-render it. That's part of the value of the input, and that's good. We're halfway in the process. This is a test, and we have Another thing that is going to happen is if you type the city name and you press enter because you are submitting, by default it triggers an event and that event causes to refresh the page. We want to prevent that from happening. So in that case, we're going to just find the onSubmit event trigger by the form, or that's going to trigger a new method that we're going to have in our search bar component. We're going to call it onFormSubmit, and that one is going to once again receive the event. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna get the event, we're gonna call this onFormSubmit, and once that happens, we're gonna pass the event. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna prevent default execution from happening. So we're gonna type prevent default. That's just a method that the event object has, which is going to prevent us from refreshing the page. So in this case, I save. Let's say I'm typing the city where I was born, press enter, and now it is not refreshing our page. Perfect, so far so good. We developed our search bar component. That's good. We can add some styling. I'm gonna worry about styling the application at the end, so let's not worry about that. Let's just worry about the functionality first. Then next, what we're gonna do is we're gonna use, create our weather API file in order to make requests to our Open Weather map. Open Weather API available is just free for you to access, so you can get weather data specifically. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go to here to the Open Weather map. Just gonna provide the link in the description below, in the section below, so you can visit it. Once you do that, the first thing that you're gonna do is you're gonna create an account. I already created an account, just nothing crazy, just provide your details, and there's gonna be pricing options. If you're concerned about that, there's a free one, which most of the people use for testing applications, starters, learning how to use APIs while learning some kind of framework, in this case React. So in this case, we're just going to use the free version. Don't worry about it. There's going to be a limit of requests that we can have to get data, to fetch data. So you might be wondering, what's an API? Because I'm talking about this and you might be not knowing what an API is. So an API is an application programming interface, and what that allows you to do is allow you to get some specific information about something related to that API. Let's say that they have this Open Weather company, they have data, right? They have data related to the weather. Now, in order for me to be able to access that, they provide an interface, a programming interface that I must be able to access with a user. They're gonna be able to send me responses or send me information back based on the API endpoints that they have available. So now, what's an API endpoint? Let me show you just in a second. So at the API page, we are gonna see all of these options. You can get the current weather data, forecast for 4 days, the one call API, the daily forecast, climatic forecast, the bulk downloading, all of this information. And if you click on any of them, this in itself, it's gonna be, you click on them, you're gonna see all of some of this information with regards to getting the information for the current weather in this case, and they're gonna provide you with the API call. And the API call, in order for you to access that, to make that request, this URL, you need to provide the city name, for example, and the API key. If we try to go to a different option, hourly forecast 4 days is another API endpoint. One call API, it's another API endpoint. There are different API endpoints, and different API endpoints allows you to retrieve certain kind of information. So in case we were talking about cars and I would like to get all the car models, well, there will be an API endpoint for car models. If there's an API endpoint for fetching all the years of all the models of the cars that we have created, then we could have another API endpoint that gets all of the years. It gets different kind of data. But anyway, hopefully you get that concept. API endpoint, this is just 1, 2, 3. And in this case, we're gonna use the current weather data API endpoint to access our API. Now, one of the things that you're gonna see is that we can test this by copying this, and let's go ahead and paste it. Let's type it HTTP in our browser, and it says that we need a city name, and we're gonna type New York. Oh man, I cannot type today. New York, and then let's say we don't provide an API key. If we don't provide an API key, it says invalid API key. An API key is kind of like your password. It's kind of like your credentials. It's like a way for them to determine where you have access to their API, where, for example, if you have paid, if this would be a paid service, if you have paid for that and then you generate a key, an API key for your account, then they're going to be able to determine, okay, with this key, user XYZ try to access this API endpoint of the weather. We need to validate whether he or she can have access to this API endpoint. So as you see, the API key is kind of like important for us to access that information. So we need to start by generating an API key. If you go to the user name, you're gonna see all of these options. You will see this My API Keys page, link. Let's go to that page, and you will see that my key is in here. Now, generally, you don't share those API keys. This is just because it's a video. I'm just teaching you here. I'm just making it easy for you to understand, but you should not share your API keys. That's just one more thing. Now, another thing is that we're gonna generate our API key if you haven't. So we're gonna call this weather app React. This is just a name for us to be able to determine which key is this, and then, or for what thing we use this key. You just click on generate, and you will see that the key is generated. Perfect. Now, remember our request that we had in here. The request is needing for that API key. And the way you pass that API key is by providing the app ID query parameter. So we type app ID, and then we try to access our API key, and then we make that request. We're still getting some errors. Let's see what's the problem. Oh, I actually know what's the problem. I think it takes some minutes for OpenWeather to just validate the key, so you have to just be patient. But let's say if I use one of the other API keys that I have used and test with it, app ID equals API key. Now you will see that we're getting some information, seeing the weather, ID, some description, stations, all of that stuff related to the weather in New York. Good, that's cool stuff. Now you can find more information if you visit the API, and once again just go to the API docs, and this is essentially what we're getting is a JSON response from the API request, and we're getting all of this information. I'm just providing an example for us to know what kind of information we can have access to. So for example, we can have access to the coordinates, to the weather, to the temperature, field flags, visibility, the wind speed, stuff like that. So you can play with it. So how can we access this information? How can we make a request from our React application to this API? So the first thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna go to our terminal, and we're gonna install Axios. Axios is just a popular library for you to make requests. So we're gonna click, we're gonna press enter. Let's install Axios. And while that's happening, what I want to create is a new folder in the source folder, and we're gonna call this APIs. We have these APIs, and inside here we are gonna call we're gonna create a new file called OpenWeather API.js. Okay, so now we need to define our methods to make the request to our API. So in that case, we need to first import our Axios library, and we're gonna give it a name of Axios. Good. And we'll start typing Axios. We're gonna see all of these methods. We're gonna say get, post, create, defaults, etc., etc. So what happens in here is that what we're doing is we're making a get request. Whenever you do this process, is a get request. This might be a little bit more of concepts that you have to know. If you don't know get or post request, please do a research about that. But essentially we're just doing a get request, and we're just typing the get function that is provided by Axios, so we can make get requests. And inside here we need to provide the URL. So in the URL, remember they gave us this URL. We're gonna copy it, we're gonna paste it, and we're gonna type http :// and we have this. Perfect. Now we need to be able to provide the city name and then the API key. So in that way, in order to do that, we need to create a method, a function. We're gonna call this function get current weather. For that thing, we're gonna type the location as the parameter, and we're gonna put this Axios.get inside here, and I would like to pass the location inside here so we can pass the location in our query. So in this case, I'm going to use a different kinds of quotes. Now in order to pass the location, instead of adding our URL within quotes, I'm going to use the template literals so we can provide the values, and then we're going to do a $, and we're going to type location. So essentially what's happening here is we're pasting the location inside this text, and then it's gonna have whatever value we have in the location parameter, it's gonna have it in here. So in a similar way, we could do that with our API key, and in that way we need to store our API key in a variable, right? My key, API key, and here we can type API key. Good. Now one thing that I'm gonna tell you is that in the case of the API keys or some kind of sensitive information, I don't recommend you to store that information in a variable in your project. When it comes to this kind of information, we usually store them in some kind of environment variables. So I'm gonna copy this one more time, this API key, I'm gonna paste it in here. But I said that we're not going to store them in environment variables. Sometimes you simply don't want to share some sensitive information out there. So for example, how can we just generate our API or environment variables? Well, we can just simply go to our source or any place within your application. But in this case, let's just go to this source folder, and we can generate this .env file. And this within here, the .env file, we can just type all of our environment variables. So you can type it just, for example, API key, and in here equals this value. We can do that. But in React, in order for you to be able to access these environment variables, the name of your environment variable needs to be preceded by the React_app_. So now if we type this React app API key, then we can have access to that API. We save that, and then we need to be able to access that. So let's say, for example, we go to our search bar. In our search bar component, we are gonna just do a quick console log, and we want to access that API key from our environment variables. We do that by using the process.env, and after that you just type the environment variable name, and it's gonna be this. We're gonna type in my key, additional log, and we're gonna refresh. We're gonna check out logs, and we see that my key is set as undefined. Why? Because we need to define the values that we have in our environment variables folder. And how do you do that? So the first thing you need to do is just kill the project, literally. And then we need to use the source.env. So essentially what you're sourcing, the file containing the environment variables, in this case .env, and make sure it's in the correct order location. So in this case, I put it under .env under the APIs. I'm going to change it to be just in the project, outside project in general, so I don't have to navigate throughout the whole process. But anyway, we have the source.env. Good. And you want to quickly inspect where our environment variables are working, you can just do an echo and $, and then type the environment variable name, and then you will see that our key is there. If you don't do this, source.env, and let's say I change the values of my environment variable and I do echo, nothing is gonna happen. It's still having the previous values that we defined. So we have to do a source.env. We do that, and then we echo our API key, and then we have, once again, our updated API key. Since that's not the one that I like, I'm gonna just set it back to the previous one. We're gonna do source, and then we're gonna do echo React app API key. Perfect. Now we just go to our OpenWeather API file, and in here, what we're gonna do is instead of using a variable name defined in our file, we're gonna type process.environment variable, and then we're gonna type the name of our API key. Now actions.get is just a request, and this is gonna return a promise. This is something that, if you're not experienced with JavaScript, you are just learning. It's something that essentially promises normally execute asynchronous operations. So we're just gonna return this so we can have it accessible. So we return the actual request, and then we can also export the method in itself. We're gonna export get current weather function from our OpenWeather API JS file, and then we're gonna import it in our search bar. We're gonna do an import. Let's say we're gonna import everything from our API. So we need to find the APIs, OpenWeather API, and we're passing this get current weather function. Good. Now we have this function. Let's test this. Let's see if we can execute this. So we're gonna have get current weather, and I'm just gonna type a random location, once again New York, and functions in order to access the response of the function or the promises. It's gonna be preceded by the word .then, and inside the .then you're gonna get whatever response is passed from that request. So we're gonna have response, and we're just gonna simply just console log that response. Good, we have that, and we need to execute or run our application one more time. npm run start. So we are running our app one more time because I had stopped it to set up the environment variables. Let me remove this. Now this process is happening in the constructor, and the constructor is making this request, the get current weather request. Once you make that request, it's gonna get some response, and you will see in the logs that we got responses. We got the config, data, headers, requests, some information, and when you start taking a look at the data, you will start taking a look at the response that we got from that API endpoint. You will see that we have the New York, we have some clouds, properties, coordinates, latitude, longitude, which we're gonna use later on down the road. And then we have the weather. We have an array, which contains the weather. We just, in general, we have a response, which is good. But now what we like to do is to execute that request whenever we submit our form. I'm just gonna cut all of that. I'm just gonna, once again, execute my current weather, and I'm gonna provide the location. Now remember, the location is stored in our state. So we're gonna access this state location first. And then we want to access the response of that request as soon as we get it. We're gonna type a log. In fact, I would like to store the current weather in my state, or the temperature. So I'm gonna store it here in my state. And I'm gonna generate I'm gonna add this div in here in my template, so we can add some paragraph containing my temperature. So I'm gonna create a variable called temperature, and that's gonna be coming from this state temperature. By the way, you can also type just directly this state, location, or temperature, but in general that's just my preference at the moment. Just use variable names. Store this into variable names and display that information. We're gonna save. We're gonna remember we can access this API documentation, so we can go back again here to take a look at the response. And that response, we can see it under the JSON structure, and we'll see that they have coordinates. The weather is passed in Kelvin. The temperature is 282. That's the unit metric that they provide. You can also provide that within your requests, what kind of metrics you will want to get. So they have this query param that you can provide within your request called units. Got the units, and I'm gonna update our Open Weather API, and that I would like it to contain units of, they have metric, imperial, and standard. Imperial is gonna have the Fahrenheit, the metric is gonna have the Celsius. So let's use the imperial at the moment, and let's type imperial, right? We save that, and let's log one more time my response. And I know that the data is contained within the data properties, so we're gonna log that. We said that we should have access to that data, to that temperature data inside the main property. So we're gonna access main, and we got the temperature here. So it says temperature. So this is gonna be Fahrenheit temperature. Okay. Let's see if that works. Let's go back to our application. Let's take a look at the logs. Type New York one more time, press enter. It makes a request, and we get our temperature in New York. Now, since we need to display that temperature in our component, in our UI, we need to update the state of the temp variable. So in this case, we're gonna do this state set temp sets, no, actually this set state, my bad. And then we access the temperature or temp property, we set the state, and that should update the template New York. There it is. We got 33 degrees Fahrenheit in New York. Kind of cold down there right now. As you saw, we created our weather API using the Open Weather map. Now the next step is we need to create our current weather component. So what happens in here is that right now we are displaying the weather within our search bar component. I really don't want this way because I would like to have a separate component just displaying the weather information, the current weather information. In that way, we're gonna create a new component, and that component we can create a new file. That file, let's call it current weather.js. Good. Or inside that file, we're gonna import React one more time. And then we're gonna generate our component. This is gonna be called current weather extends React.component. Good. Then we're gonna have, remember, we're gonna have to have a render method in order to render the information, and inside here is where I would like to display the weather. So I'm gonna call this, and I would like to start setting up the structure of how I would like to display this current weather component. I'm gonna type a class name. This is gonna be called current weather. I'm gonna have also, I want to display also the feels like information. So I'm gonna split this into things, because we're gonna have our current weather, and inside here we're gonna contain the actual temperature. We're gonna have a temperature of, just for template purposes, so we can test this. paragraph containing the temperature. Also, we can have the description. We can copy this. We can have the description. And I'm adding all of that, all of these names, because that's what I'm gonna use for my CSS to be able to style this properly. So let's say it's cold or clear or sunny. Let's call it sunny. It's more clear that sunny. We got the description. We can say main content. Let's call it content. And then we can also have other information such as this: current weather. Feels like it feels like 32. Okay, got that. Now let's make this, export this, make it accessible for other files. We're exporting this current weather. Let's go to our app.js. Let's import that one more time. Current weather from components, current weather. And now let's access, or let's add that component in our app.js template. App component, current weather. We save, and we're displaying our current weather. Perfect. We're gonna have also probably an image. Let me see. The image is gonna contain a URL with the icon of the weather. And in the meantime, we're not displaying anything. Let's type a name, last name, current weather icon. Okay. Information just right now. We don't have any image. So if you notice, we have this current weather, and remember we have this current weather in here. But then we have this search bar, right? And the search bar is the one containing the location, and the search bar is the one making the request to get the current weather. This is something that you have to understand right away, especially when developing more complex application. This search bar is a child component of the app component. Generally, we would like to have app component, or the parent component, being the one who defines the state, the ones who keeps track of the state, not the child component. So in this case, what I would like to do is just get all of these values from the state, get all of these values from here, all of the state, and just pass it on to the app component. So let's go ahead, and this app component is a functional component. Let's convert it into a class component. Extends from React, extends React, that component. And then we need to have our render function. Our render function is gonna return our template, right? Perfect. And then we are gonna literally use most of the things that we have in here in our search bar. Our state. Yes, we're gonna copy the on input change, on form submit. We're gonna copy that and we're gonna store them in here. Now we're keeping the state. We need to import the API file. I'm gonna copy it from here. Come in here. I'm gonna import that. We gotta get current weather. Good. Okay, we have all of that information. Let's see what else is missing. This import is not correct. Okay, let's update the location. What else is missing? We need to import React as well. From React, we import React. We have access to React. Now everything is working back to normal. But let's say, remember I said that we shouldn't have the state in the child component. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna remove this state from here, right? And we're gonna remove this set state because we're not setting the state in here either. And we're not gonna set the state, or we're not gonna make this request at all in here either. Okay. So the first thing we're gonna have an error because we don't have this state location that is used in here. So we don't have this anymore. And let's say that we don't have these values right now. The location value. So I'm gonna type location, something temporal, just so we can fix the error. We have this state location, that's fine. This is state temperature, it's been displayed here. So what happens in here is that we need to communicate between components, some information. Now, the way you communicate between a parent component to a child component is by passing the information using the props to the child component. If we go to our parent component, and in our parent component we say that we want to pass the location to our search bar, we can say that the search bar is going to have a prop, and that property or props is going to be called location. And I'm going to provide the location, the value of the location is going to be equal to the location, the state location that I have in my app.js file. Now, if you go back to your search bar, you will see that the constructor is receiving these props. And essentially that's how we can access to that. And we go back to our search bar, we can just simply access those props in here. So if we go to our render function and we do props, or these props, that location, and let's say that I'm gonna provide the location, the default location in our app component is gonna be New York. One more time, save that, and this is not working. Let's see what it's missing. Oh, actually I had to refresh. I just refreshed the page, and you see now that the value was just passed. So I'm just gonna set this back to empty. The same thing we're gonna do with the temperature, but actually I don't want the temperature there. I just want the temperature in the current weather. So in that way we can just go back to our search bar and we can just delete this, so we don't display the temperature anymore, right? Now the other thing that is happening here is that, let's say I'm gonna start typing something, and what's happening is that we are not getting the input updated. Well, remember, this is dependent on the props, that location. So what happens is that we need to update this props location. The props are read-only, it's something that you don't update. In order to update the props, we need to update the value passed on into that props, that location, which is coming from the parent element. But we need to be able to tell the parent element that we got a new value, that there's some kind of action happening in the input. This on input change is happening, and we need to tell the parent element that something's happening. So how do we do that? So the way we do that is by using a prop, and that prop is gonna almost like act as a function to emit those values to the parent component. So we're gonna say that these props, and we're gonna say that the input, we're gonna have a prop called input change, and on there we're gonna pass the event. This is a function, we're gonna pass the event. And now we go to our app component, we're gonna have this prop called on input change. And that input change is emitting this event, right? I would like to get access to that event into my on input change. This on input change, and we're gonna pass the event. We format this a little bit better. We save, and let's try it one more time. Now this is working. Why? Because we're triggering this input change This input change is updating once again the state location, and whenever the state location gets updated, it triggers this render process, and whenever the render process happens, this is going to emit the latest location value to the props location, to the search bar, and the search bar subsequently is going to have this value. Also, we need to be able to do a similar thing with the onSubmit. So we need to be able to detect whenever the form gets submitted. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna create a new prop, form submitted, and we're gonna provide, we don't need to provide any method, just one or any parameter. Just gonna go back in here and we're gonna get access to that prop, form submitted, and whenever that form gets submitted, this method is gonna get triggered on form submit in our app component. Whenever that happens, we'll need to prevent default because that's being prevented in the search bar component. But what we need to do is we need to update our current weather. That's gonna happen. And then whenever that happens, we need to be able to communicate over current weather component about the temperature. Once again, we create props. We create props for our current weather. In this case, we're gonna say current temperature. And current temperature is gonna be equal to this state temperature temp. And we need to go back into our current weather component. And inside here, we need to we need to access to our props, these props, and we set that to current temperature. Okay. Let's try this. So let's say I'm gonna type one more time New York, make the request. It makes the request and then it passes to the child component, the current weather component, the current temperature. Perfect. Now we need to access other information such as the description, it feels like as well, and also we can also have access to the URL of the icon link that they provide, the Open Weather API they provide. So let's take a look at the example file that they have. We're accessing the main temperature, feels like. So, okay. So what we're gonna do, we are going to go back into our app component. Our app component, we're gonna find more props. For the current weather, we're gonna say feels like. This is one. This state feels like. Temperature. We're also going to provide the description or the main description. Let's say description is state description. And I'm setting a state because I need to store all of these values in my state as well. We got state, description, and also I think we need the icon URL. I think they provide it somewhere in here. Here, icon. And I'll explain you in a second how to get access to that. Icon is gonna be equal to this state, that icon. Okay. So now we need to make sure that we add those properties to our state. We are adding feels like, set it to empty, description, icon. Good. Now we're gonna update those values from our requests. Our request is gonna contain feels like as well. Press that data, and that data is gonna be the feels like is gonna be under this property. That main, that feels like, and then we're gonna have a description that we need to update as well. Press that data, and the description is gonna be under the weather array, and it's gonna be under the main. You can also get the description here. I'm just gonna take the main. So So let's get weather. Let's get access, or access the first variable or the first item of that array, and let's access the main. Good. We need to also access the icon or update the icon. And I'm gonna copy pretty much all of that. Press that data icon. Good. Now we do that. We need to go back into our current weather. Go ahead and update all of these values with these props. Call it description. We have the feels like. Feels like. These props. That feels like. And also for the icon, essentially they have the Open Weather API, they have the ability for you to access the icons that they provide. Yeah, I think that is using this particular one, this URL. I will add it in the description below. And the way you get the URL or the icon image is by using this URL. You're gonna have the icons and night icons. It's cataloged by a D preceded by a number, D of day, N of night, and then description. Let's see. If we copy this, for example, this is just an example of the image, and then you will see that the image is of a day, rainy day. Now they also tell us that you can essentially get a larger image by typing the 2x time, 2 times the image, the size. You can also do 4 times the image size, and so forth. Okay, all that we need to do in here is to get this as part of the URL, right? Let's generate it in here to make it simpler. Create a variable containing that value. And we're gonna do a template literal for this. Okay, so we know that if we go in here, we're gonna get an icon of 10N, and then we provide the size that we would like, and then that PNG. Okay, let's do that. Let's type the size 2x, or let's do it a little bit bigger, 2x PNG. Let's provide the URL and let's save it. This is complaining because it's missing a alt right now, so we can take as an advantage or as a reference the same description. Okay, let's go ahead into our app, and we are going to display the weather from New York. We press enter, and in New York is 33 degrees. The clouds, if we change it to a different place, let's say San Antonio, we get the values updated. Perfect. I just realized that the image is not displaying right now. What's going on here? So we're expecting the element. We see that the URL is HTTP. Well, actually, I was playing around there and typing the wrong URL here. Let's remove that extra HTTP. Let's refresh the page. Let's type one more time New York. Still is not working. We're gonna copy this URL from the image tag. Let's see, execute it if that works. So that works. Oh, okay, I made a mistake. I got confused for a second, but we're using the wrong attribute. The attribute that we need to use is a source attribute. I completely forgot about it. Good, now you get to see the image related to the current weather. So let's try one more time and we'll change it. Okay, let's try a different location. There it is. Okay, it's been updating, or it's getting updated correctly. Good. So we got the current weather, we got the feels like, we got the description, and the current weather. Perfect. Okay, we got good there. Now, what's the next step? The next step is to create the forecast weather component. So let's gonna create that component. forecast weather.js, correct? And once again, we're gonna import our React from React, and we're gonna do class, we're gonna name it as forecast from, or extend, sorry, React.component. Perfect. We have to have our render method, at least that, and then that method is gonna return the content that we would like to display in there. That's gonna be at least containing a parent element, and let's say that the parent element is gonna contain this class called forecast. Okay, we're gonna export this by default, this class or this component, and also we're gonna go to the app component and include it as part of our component. So import weather, actually forecast from components, forecast weather. Okay, let's add that in the template. We got forecast, and let's just type something real quick. My forecast. Just to verify if this is getting rendered. Let's refresh. It's not getting rendered. Oh, I forgot to save on the app component my forecast. Okay, cool. Perfect. Now, one of the things that I'm gonna recommend you to do is to try to keep your imports organized. It might sound a little bit dumb at the beginning, but sometimes it makes a little bit of a difference. So generally, you will want to add your third-party libraries on top. At least that's my personal preference. I like to keep the imports of libraries dependencies in the top. Then a section for the components, sections for the styles related to that particular component, and also sections for the API services files that we have. In this case, they get the Open Weather API. So in here, we're gonna have our forecast. So our forecast is gonna display hourly forecast of what's gonna be the weather based on the location, right? So we need to find that API endpoint first one more time. I already did a little bit of work just inspecting the different API endpoints that they have available, so we can see what we could take advantage of and what we cannot. So let's take a look at the API, and then the one that we're gonna need for our hourly forecast is gonna be this, the one called API. It says that it's got the minute forecast, the hourly forecast, the daily forecast, the historical data, national weather alerts, etc. And this is the one that we care about, the hourly forecast. So let's go to the API docs and let's start taking a look at the API endpoints. This is the API endpoint. So it says that we got the one call API endpoint, and it says that it's asking for the lat and the long query parameter, which are the latitude and longitude. Essentially, they're asking the latitude and longitude for the area you're looking for. So for example, if you type New York, you have to type the latitude and longitude of New York. But where do we get that latitude and longitude values? Well, in the previous API endpoint that we use for getting the current weather, that API endpoint, let me show you. In the current weather API endpoint, we take a look at the example JSON file. You can see that they can send us the coordinates, and in the coordinates they send us the longitude and latitude of the particular location that we type. So that's good. Okay, so if that's the case, what we're gonna do first is we're gonna set up our function to make the request to the one call API endpoint so we can get the hourly forecast. Take a look. Let's go to the Open Weather API JS file, and we're gonna create another function. We're gonna call it get forecast, and we're gonna provide the latitude and the longitude. We're gonna type LAT or longitude LON, and we got our function. Our function is gonna return that promise. The promise is pretty much our requests to our API endpoint. Let's see. We copy all of this. We paste this in here. And using a string or using template literals, we're gonna update this with $signs. And then we open and close curly braces. The same thing for the longitude. Good. We could also set the exclude query parameter to exclude certain forecast values, but in this case, I don't care. We can just keep all of the values there. We need to provide our API key. Provide our API key by accessing our environment variable that we call initially React App API key. Okay. Now, if you notice, this URL, it's the base of the URL is the same. So what we can do is just store that in a variable called base URL. And we can copy all of that, paste it in here, and just replace that with our variable base URL. Okay, the same thing we could do it with the get forecast method. Okay, get forecast, gonna use base URL. Good, perfect. Now we could do this, but also Axios give us a way to also set up a base URL. So if you start taking a look at the documentation, you will find that Axios has defaults property, and that defaults property is going to contain, it's an object that's going to contain all of these different values, and within one of them is going to contain the base URL. So within here we can say the base URL for Axios, and we can remove this. We could also remove this. So why did I remove this? So what's happening here behind the scenes is that Axios, the defaults base URL, what happens is that at the moment of making a request, it's already appending this URL. And then whenever you start adding the URL for that particular API endpoint, it's going to add that at the end. It's going to be the same as having this the beginning of the request URL, and then they're gonna attach the subsequent section. Also, we know that we're gonna need our app API app ID token or key, so we can store that in a query param or in a variable app ID query param. Can keep that in here. Template, using the template literal, and we change this, and now we use app ID query param. It's gonna be the same as having all of this information, so we're gonna copy and paste here. Okay, good. My longitude, I'm using the wrong variable. And I notice that longitude is going to be equal to the value. Okay, now it's good. Also, we need to make this available so we can export it and make it available for other files to get access to this method. But the first thing we're going to test is we're going to test whether this works or not after setting our base URL. So let's go to our project and let's type New York, and it's still working. That's good. Perfect. Now, what we're gonna do is we need to get our forecast. So when do we get our forecast or make the forecast request? We can make it at the moment of getting the current weather. Whenever we get the current weather, remember, we get the coordinates. And once we get the coordinates, we can make the request to get the forecast. So the first thing is we're gonna need to be able to have access to our new method called getForecast from the OpenWeather API file. Then we're gonna get use or make use of that getForecast, and we're gonna store the values in a variable. So from here we're getting the latitude, which is gonna be equal to res.data .coord.lat. The same thing for longitude. Okay, we got that. That's good. And then we can use these variables in here. But the problem with here is that these variables are within this scope. And as soon as we try to use it in here, the getForecast is not within the same scope. Essentially, we cannot use it. The scopes, these variables need to be defined within different scopes. So what we're gonna do to make this work is we're gonna convert this into an asynchronous call, or actually we're gonna convert this into a synchronous process, because whenever you make a request, in reality that's just an asynchronous process. An asynchronous process means that you have to wait. I mean, it's not something that gets executed right away. In order to get a response from that API endpoint, it takes some time. Sometimes it's just quick, sometimes it's not that quick. It's just quick oftentimes, so you don't notice that it's asynchronous. But in reality, making a request is an asynchronous operation. And this is a promise. So we're gonna, instead of doing accessing the values using .then, we're gonna convert this function, this onFormSubmit function, into an async function. By doing that, we could have access to, or we can use the await keyword. And what happens in here is that the await keyword is gonna return the values from the response of this request. And we no longer have to have this .then anymore. So in the meantime, we're just gonna this out so I can explain it a little bit more. But what happens is that we're gonna store the response, weather response, right? And so what happens is that weather response is gonna be the same as res that we have whenever we access it using the .then method, right? So weather response is gonna have this data, and then it's gonna have all of the information that comes with it. So in that way, we could have access to our latitude and longitude, but instead of using the res variable, we're gonna use the weather res variable. Good. Now we updated that value. We're also gonna keep this value, this set state, somewhere in here, and I'm gonna tell you why in a second. Good. Now the second thing is that we need to make the request to get the forecast, so we're gonna store the values in here in this variable called forecast response, and then we're gonna put our await. Now, something I didn't mention is that as soon as you make this await, you add this await to a promise. What's happening is that until that promise finishes the process of getting a response, in this case, this request finishes getting a response, the subsequent are not gonna be executed. So if you don't have this, if we do it like in the previous way where we do like the get current and then we use .then, right? We log something happens, but then let's say that we're gonna depend upon this to execute a different process. So for example, to store our latitude and longitude. For example, if we have another variable containing this weather, right? We store or reassign the response to the weather res, and then we try to set up the value of the latitude in this variable. Is probably gonna fail because since this process is an asynchronous, this process gets executed, but that doesn't mean that it's gonna finish on and then it executes the other one. So this process can take, the process of getting a request can take like about 2 seconds, 1 second, or milliseconds, but it takes some time. And then by the time it runs this line of code, this process hasn't finished. So whether res is undefined still until here we set up a value. And so if we try to access undefined.data in here, it's gonna fail. And we can do a quick test, a second. If we try to execute this, for example, and we try to run our app, let's display the console. Let's see, New York one more time, search, and you see that we're getting errors. It says cannot read property data of undefined. And that's exactly what I mentioned a second ago. Whether res variable doesn't have any values, so it's gonna be undefined, and that's gonna fail. So that's why we need to add the await keyword. So in that way, this process, this asynchronous process, we convert it into a synchronous process. Good. We access the latitude, the longitude, and now we need to get access to the, or make the request to get the forecast. By providing the latitude, longitude, and we're gonna wait until that gets a response. And what we're gonna do is we're going to set the state. Remember, we used to use this res whenever we had a response for whether res. So we need to just update these variables. Once we update the variables, it's gonna have whether res, that data, that main temperature is gonna work just fine. But we want to store our forecast, and that forecast most likely is gonna be an array. If we check out the documentation again, we take a look at the JSON file for that request. We see the current one. We can use the current. They also provide the current. They have minutely, they have hourly forecast, and hourly is going to contain this array of values. Okay, so we're going to store forecast data, and we're going to have hourly. Hourly is going to be an array. Good. And that should be it pretty much that we need. Good. As soon as we do the set state, it's going to re-render, and we need to provide the forecast values to our forecast component. So we're going to create a props called hourly forecast, and we should probably give it a more appropriate name to here. So it's going to call hourly forecast. And in here, we are gonna set this state. Inside, we're gonna have to set the hourly forecast array. So we could have access to here, to the hourly forecast, or we set the state to hourly forecast. And then let's just change it to forecast this prop, and let's set it to this state, hourly forecast. Good. Now, we're gonna go to our forecast weather component, and we're gonna iterate through each one of those values. Let's see my forecast. We're gonna generate a component or a container. Actually, we're gonna do a little bit different for this. So what's happening is that we're gonna generate multiple little sections containing the forecast for each hour, right? We're gonna have the div for, forecast for 10 p.m., forecast for 11 p.m., forecast for 12 a.m., right? And so forth. We're gonna have all of these, and that's gonna contain the same structure. It's gonna have an icon, it's gonna have a text, it's gonna have the hour, the forecast, it's gonna have some information that's gonna be repeated over and over. So what we can do is we can just create a variable containing the template that is going to be displayed, because we need to access or generate that over and over and again. So in order to do that, we first need to access our props, and we call that we are going to access this forecast prop. Yes, we said that our props is going to be called forecast, and that forecast prop is going to be an array. So it's going to be an array. An array has a map, and a map we're going to return a template, and that template could be this, right? So it's gonna have this, but I know that the forecast contains more information than this. So first thing, we're gonna set up a name for this. We're gonna call it forecast item to that wrapper element, and then we're gonna add a new paragraph, and that paragraph we're gonna display the temperature. We are going to display the description, we need to display also the time, and they are sending us this date time, and I already checked this API endpoint. So what we need to do is we need to generate this or convert this just so we could get the hours. So if we copy or we open just quickly our developer tools just so we could check what's that time, and we just copy this time and we create new date, we pasted that, it's gonna tell us that this date is on 1970, and that's not correct. So in reality, they are sending us the value differently. We need to just do a multiply, or we just need to multiply that value by 1,000, and yes, and that value should be the correct value. This is more valid 2020. I mean, I think it's just example data, so that might be the day when they generated this data. Okay, so we do that, and then we just need to get the hours. Okay, we have 6, so that's how we're gonna get the hour, by generating a new date. F hourly, it's gonna have the date time times 1,000, you get the hours. Good. Now what happens in here is that if we get some hours, let's say I can exactly use my current time right now. So if I get hours right now, is 15 or 3 p.m. so we get the hours, we're gonna get 15. But I don't want to display it like that. I would like to display it 3 p.m. or 3 a.m. I don't want to display it with the 15. If it goes all the way, just on all the way up to 12, and it starts all over to 1 p.m., you know, you get the idea. So in this case, we're gonna use a let to define our variable name, and we're gonna say if our hour is greater than 12, that means that it's gonna be PM, right? So hour is gonna be equal to, it's gonna be in the afternoon, but if we just subtract 12 to whatever the value the future is, for example 13 minus 12, it should be 1, 14 minus 12, or 14 minus 12, it should be 2, 15 minus 12, 3, you get the idea. So we're gonna subtract the current hour minus 12, and we're gonna get the updated value. Also, we are gonna store the AM and the PM. So at the moment, I'm just gonna say that it's gonna be AM, and if the hour is greater than 12, I'm gonna set it that it's gonna be PM. Good. Okay, we have the hour. Now what we're gonna do here is we're gonna display the hour and AM and PM. Okay. Also, I'm gonna add some class names for each one of those. Forecast item, hour, temperature, description, and also I would like to display the icon. They have an icon in here within the weather property. Let's see, how are we gonna display this? We got the temperature. We're gonna display it in between here, so we're gonna have the image. We're gonna have the source, and the source is gonna contain the URL. I'm just gonna take as a reference the same URL that we took for the current weather component. We copy this URL, add it in the forecast. Good. And the only little difference here is that we're gonna get the icon a little bit smaller. At the moment, probably like 2x. And let's see what else is missing. There should be f that weather, the first item of the weather array, dot icon. And now we're gonna type our URL in here. Also remember, we need to provide the alt, otherwise it's gonna complain about it. And we could use the description. Good. Now that should be it. Let's see what else is missing. Oh, we generated this and we need to return or keep this in a variable. This is gonna contain forecast items because we're returning these templates, and we're gonna append that inside our wrapper element. We got this wrapper element, and in here we're gonna call the forecast items. And good. Let's try, let's save it, and let's try that. Try with New York. Good. We're getting multiple. Yeah, we get the forecast. We get the forecast for 3 p.m. Get the forecast 4 p.m., 5 p.m., 6 p.m. So that's good. It's just that it's not styled correctly, so it's kind of like confusing. Don't worry, we're gonna get it to make it look prettier than this. I promise. Just stick with me. Okay, and also we're getting some warnings in here, and it's telling us that each child in a list should have a unique key prop. And that's correct. That's something that is part of React. Whenever you're generating an array of templates, it's gotta have some kind of differentiator, and you have to differentiate that using a key. So in this case, we need to provide a key, and that key needs to be unique though. In this case, I don't want to complicate it too much. I just want to access the index provided by the map function. So essentially, the map function provides this index value as a second parameter, and it's just saying that whenever it iterates through the forecast, let's say for the forecast number 1, it's going to say that the index is 0. For the forecast number 2, it's going to be the index number 2. Forecast number 3, index number 2, etc., etc. So we're just going to use the index as our key, and we're going to be able to differentiate that. Okay, that should be plenty. I recommend you could add a more meaningful name. Well, in fact, let's just do it right away. Forecast item, and then let's do a template literal. Okay, Let's give this a try. Continuous run. Okay, let's just change it. Key. Okay, got the key. Good. We refresh. Let's take a look whether we have or not some errors. So we get to New York. And let's see. Okay, our error went away. Good. We got our forecast method or component completed. That's good. And we can just complete this section. Now it comes the fun part. We just have to install our application. I already have in my mind how I would like to install this. So let's just get started. Let's start with our search bar component. Let's install that. And for that one, I'm gonna create a search bar CSS or Sass file instead. Search bar .scss file. In our search bar, I didn't set any classes to differentiate all of these values. Okay, so I'm going to add some values. Actually, yes, let's add some values to see search bar class name, search bar button, class name, search bar underscore input. Okay, and we're gonna use these values as a reference to install our component. We're gonna access the element using the class, using the dot or the period, and then the class name, and then we're just gonna provide according styles. Okay, so we're gonna access the search bar button and the search bar input as well. So we could do it by doing this. We're just instantly providing styling for the search bar button and also the search bar input. So what happening here is that since I'm using Sass, I'm typing this ampersand. What the ampersand does is it takes this first initial section and then it appends it with this, and this is just the same as saying search bar underscore button, and then you provide the correct styling. And that's why I was just naming it search dash bar, so I could include all of my styling within the search bar styling. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is make the background transparent. Okay, it's not working, and it's not working is because I need to import my styles. We're gonna import our styles, search bar Sass file, and now our background is transparent. The border, I don't like that border. Just gonna set it to 1 pixel. Solid. Let's just try something like white in the meantime, and then we will experiment and play around with it. Okay, good. Now the other thing I would like to do is I'm gonna change the color because I'm not a big fan of that color, and I'm gonna use as a reference the icons that they send us. So you know that whenever I type New York and I get all of these values, we get those icons, right? This icon is symbolizing that it's dark. There's an icon that symbolizes that is sunny, and I'm gonna use the color of that as a reference to start generating my styling for my whole app. I have an extension here so I can quickly identify the color, and I get the hex number of that color, so I can modify first and foremost the background of my app. And let's go ahead, let's find out. We got the background color, it's this RGB red. I'm gonna change it for this, and I want to get it a little bit darker than that. Save, it looks darker, that's better. I would like to increase the padding to that. You can play around with that if you use your developer tools and start typing some stylings. And remember, those stylings are going to be removed if you don't save them in your actual SAS file. But that's just for a way to quickly take a look at how it's looking your application with changes on the fly, with style changes on the fly. Okay, so let's do, first thing is the width off. Let's expand this a little bit more. Okay, I would like the search bar to cover the maximum width. So first thing, good. Now I also would like the search bar to have a margin top, let's say 10 pixels in the meantime, margin bottom 10 pixels. Okay, we got that. We got our form, and our form, I would like the button and the input a different styling. So for the input, I would like to, if you notice the left border is set up, but then also on the bottom we have the right border and it's also there, so we have kind of like two borders there. I'm just gonna use one of them, and I'm gonna use the one for the search button. So I'm gonna remove that for the input button. So we got border left, and that's gonna be 0 pixels. Good. I also would like to make, I'll give it some radius to the border, and it's gonna be just to the top left or top right and bottom right of the input. Border bottom right radius. Let's say it's gonna be what, 15 pixels? That's a lot. 7 pixels, sure, let's try 7 pixels at the moment. Border top right radius 7 pixels. I would like to increase the size of this as well, so I'm gonna make it a little bit taller. 45 pixels, might be a little bit too much. Let's do it 35 pixels. Okay, the same thing we're gonna do, or we're gonna copy this just for references purpose. We're gonna have that the height is gonna be this. Okay, we are going to do the radius, but not on the right on the bottom, but on the left radius. Good. Same thing, border top left radius 5. Good. Now we do have this. What else is missing here? See, just to make it sure that it's matching. We're gonna use a form. This is gonna be a display flex. Okay, so I'm just literally gonna copy and paste this in my styles. So this is gonna be for the search input, right? So I'm gonna add all of the styles for that one. The same thing is gonna be for the search button. Search button, and we got this at the bottom. Also, we need to add the stylings for the search bar wrapper element. Good. And we quickly save and refresh, and we still have something not working correctly. See, let me do something. I forgot. Probably we could do a display flex on the form. There it is. That's what we needed. We need to do a display flex on the form, and what's happening is that it's just making sure to do that the search button uses the same height as the input. Okay, so let's add another class, and we're gonna use it for here. Class name, search bar form, and update this. We're gonna add the form. We're gonna say display equals flex. Okay, we got that fixed. Got something else missing here. It's not taking the full width. Okay. We need to make sure that it grows the width of our input. I'm gonna use flex grow 1, and that should take the whole width, or the rest of the width of the whole search bar. Also, we want to add, I would like to add a padding to the app component. Okay, so we're gonna do padding. Let's say 15. In the meantime, I don't really like that. That's not the one that I'm looking for. Let's see, padding, margin. Well, the margin is gonna, no, that's not the one that we're looking for. Actually, see, take a look at our app template. The one that we're using is the app header. Okay, and the app header is the one that needs the padding. Good. Now also, I don't like the fact that my contents and the app header are in the middle. I just want it all the way at the top, at least the search bar. So I'm going to remove this align item center that it has by default. Let me see what I'm missing. Remove that. Okay, perfect. I think that the search input might be a little bit too big. See, let's try using 25. 25 is better. Back, let's just remove this display flex. There it is. This display flex. We have. I'm gonna check our app header. The app header has got the pad in there. Okay, it looks decent. It's not the best, but it's looking decent. Now we need to style our order components. So the first one is gonna be the current weather. And I noticed something, and the thing is that I would like to automatically search initially whenever I open the application to search a specific location and display the information. It makes a request to get the information. So what I'm gonna do is, by default, I'm gonna set a location of New York. Well, I'm gonna type the city where I was born, because that's the one that I prefer. Good. We got this, and we need to trigger this on form submit, because the on form submit is the one that sets the updated values once it gets the request, or makes a request to get the weather data. So we're gonna do this on submit, on form submit. Let's try that one more time, and then we're getting our values right away. That's good. So next, we're gonna style our current weather component. The same thing, we're gonna create our current weather SAS file at CSS, and we need to make sure that we're importing it into our current weather component. Current weather SAS file. Okay, now we're gonna have all of these class names that we previously set. So we have the current weather wrapper element. Let's see if we can set this somewhere in here so we can check. So we got this current weather. The current weather is gonna contain the content, there's also temp, there's also description, there's an icon as well, and there's a feels like. Okay, so let's start playing with it in our developer tools. So for the weather, we got the full width. I would like to give it some type of background different from the one that we're using, a little bit of lighter background. And I'm gonna use first select the primarily background that we're using and slowly finding a lighter color. I think I'm gonna stick with that. In the meantime, I don't like it that square looking, so I'm gonna make the borders being round with border radius. Let's set it to 7 pixels because that's the one that we use for our search bar. Let's say what else. We're going to take a look at our content. And the way I want to display the content is the temperature in the left side, the description right underneath, and then also the image, the icon right to the right of the description, and the feels like I would like to display it all the way top right of the current weather component. So let's start with this initial content. And in order to separate this first, we need to make the current weather display, set it to display as flex. Okay, so now we have those values right side by side. Now we're gonna select our content, and for our content we have temperature, we have description, image. Okay, what we're gonna do is we're going to wrap the temperature and the description inside another element. Okay, we're gonna call last name equals current weather text. Call it like that, and we are gonna use content text. Okay, we got our text, and the text is also, oh, I lost my styling that I had because I had refreshed the page. So one more time, let's get this back again. So we're gonna get display flex, background color, pick any random one, and let's start playing with it. And then lighter color. Okay, border radius 7 pixels, and let's save that in our stylings stats file. Good, we got that. Now this our thing, we're gonna go to our current weather content. We would like to separate it one more time. Display flex. Okay, we're displaying it side by side, and we're gonna do that right away. Save it in our content. Also, I would like them to be in the center as well. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna select the current weather text containing the Fahrenheit, the weather, and the description. We're gonna also use flex. Actually, let me try something different. I'm gonna align the items in the center. Okay, So that should be sufficient. Also, another thing that I'm gonna do is there's a lot of padding or margin between the description and the temperature. Let's remove that. And let's say the margin is gonna be 0 at the moment. Margin 0. Okay, that's a little bit better. Okay, and we're using that for both description and temperature, so we can just combine them, separate them by a comma, and assign the same style property. Margin 0. Okay, I would like to also add some padding in here, like probably a padding of 10 pixels just in the meantime. Okay, now that's looking better. The image is looking a little bit too big, the icon. So let's see if we can just decrease the size of it. 150 pixels. Yep, 150 pixels. See, let's increase the size of temperature. But let's first save the width for the image. Size of the temperature. Let's try the font size of 24, not 2, but 24 pixels. A little bit more, 42. And for the description, font size, let's say 16 pixels. 14, let's set it to 14, or let's say it's 16, I prefer 16. Okay. Set it to temperature, font size, 14 pixels. Description, font size, 16 pixels. And actually I meant to say this is 42 or 48. 42. Set it to 42. Something that I miss is to use the degree sign, the degree symbol. Yeah, this degree, so I'm gonna copy this and I'm gonna add it to my temperature. Okay, it looks more like a degree. Good. See what else is missing. Now this feels like I'm gonna set it more to the right. This right now is more to the left. So let's go ahead and inspect this element. Let's see, weather. So in order to fix that, what we could do is to use justify. If we select the current weather, by the way, we justify the content and we can do a space between. Okay, now our text is more to the right. Also, we would like to add the degree symbol to the feels like, and that text is a little bit too big for my preferences. It's too big, so I'm gonna remove the margin first and also add a font size of probably 12 pixels. Okay, maybe 14 pixels. Okay, good. We have that and we save it under the feels like. Okay, now it's looking a little bit better. I don't like the fact that this is not in the center. Let's see what's missing. We probably have to do a text align center. No, That didn't do a trick, but let's see, let's try something different. Just in case, for testing purposes, we do this. No, I think that's okay. That should be okay. Yeah, we got that. We don't need this right now. Okay. We got that looking a little bit better. What else we need here? We need to install our hourly forecast as well. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead to the components folder, create your forecast weather, that's as file, and we're gonna import that into our forecast. We're just gonna put this down here so we can easily look the template. But yeah, I'm gonna put this, or we're gonna import the forecast SAS file in my forecast component. Good, perfect. And here we're using the forecast. Okay, wrapper element, and each of those are gonna have a forecast item. The forecast item is gonna contain the hour and also it's going to contain the description and also the temperature. Okay, good. Now I need to display first all of these items side by side. So the way we're gonna do it is by using the display flex. But another thing that I want to add is a title, because I cannot tell if this forecast is by the hour, by minutes, by days. I'm just gonna add a quick title real quick. H3 hourly forecast, or just gonna add in the name of forecast title. We got that. Good. Now we're gonna do forecast title. Okay. And now let's take a look at the forecast, inspect it, so we can take a look at the forecast parent component. I was thinking to do a display flex as well, so we can get all of our items to the right. Okay, but that's not gonna work because it's gonna set our items and our title next to each other. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add the forecast items within another wrapper element that's gonna be called forecast items. Now inside here we're gonna add the forecast items. Good. The items is going to be having a display flex, so we can set all of those items next to each other. Something is missing. Let's see. Oh, I didn't save on the forecast weather, so that's why. Let's try one more time. Refresh. Still is not working. Okay, so I noticed one of the things that it was telling us is this warning error message. Can call set state on a component that is not yet mounted. So essentially components have a life cycle, and one of those life cycle events or hooks is called whether the component has been mounted or not, and we're gonna use that so we can use this onForm submit, which is essentially the one that is gonna update our data. So component did mount, and we're gonna move this onForm submit method to here, and we're gonna refresh our page, and you will see that the error message is gone. Another error message that I'm looking at is that the OpenWeather app, the image is not found because it's not correct. The URL is missing the actual icon. And I think that what's happening is that's happening in the current weather. Yes, because that's the one that we're using with 4x, 4 times the image size, the regular image size. So let's see, we're providing the icon props from the app component. We have this icon, this state, icon, weather, icon. See the request, JSON file, the weather should be there. See if we're missing something. Let's log the response, weather, response, weather response. We log that. Get the data, weather, array, that main ID icon. Something is weird here. Probably that's happening at the beginning, because at the beginning we don't have any value or any data, so it's not gonna retrieve anything. Okay, let's do something. In case we don't have anything, we're gonna go to our current weather component, and in case we don't have a URL, if we're gonna set our image, and if these props, that icon is present, we're gonna set our image, and that image is gonna contain this URL. We're gonna use this, so it's gonna be equal to that template literal. Actually, this is a different thing. Yes, it's a different thing. No, this is actually our image, and we're gonna replace all of that, and we use our image variable. Let's refresh one more time. We got rid of the error message. Good. Now let's go back in here. Let's remove the log. Good. Now let's keep installing our app. So one of the things I was trying to do is just to add some kind of background to the forecast, and it's not been added right now. So let's go to our forecast weather. And one of the things that I noticed, and it was my mistake, is that I have not correctly imported the SAS file. So I need to include that CSS, and now we're getting our background. That's good. Now that's a little bit of a bad background for us right now. So let's inspect the elements so we can make changes on the fly. We're gonna get a background white, and the font or the color, I would like to have a color of, at the moment, just black. Okay, good. Also, I don't know if I like that overflow. Let me see, because you see that there's too many items that don't fit in the container. We'll take care of that in a second. So let's change the background color, and at the moment just Let's change the color of the text. That's good. Also, I want to change this margin 0 with the temperature to 0 at the moment. And that temperature, working in the temperature in Kelvin. So let's go ahead and go to the Open Weather API. And we need to type we need to add the units query param, so it's imperial. So we get it in Fahrenheit. We update. See, something is wrong. Double ampersands. We refresh. Something is still wrong. See what's missing. Oh, I needed another ampersand here. There it is. Okay, now I got that fixed. We got it in Fahrenheit. Again, we need to add the degrees symbol, but I don't find that. And weather. Okay. Right, and let's get the forecast weather, the temperature or the ampersand. Good. Okay. Now what else? Let's also we're going to inspect that particular element. Remove that. Okay. So we're going to inspect the hour. We're saying that we're removing the margin. The hour forecast item temperature, we're going to remove the margin as well. I want to set up the value of the temperature or the color to a light gray. So you see, maybe it's a little bit too light. Let's use that value. Okay. And we're going to set it in hour. The margin is going to be the same or similar to the hour for the temperature. So we're going to set that the margin is going to be equivalent to 0 for both. Good. Now I think that the clouds, the description as well, I would like it 0 at the moment. Okay. Also, I would like to get some padding for the whole forecast. Let's add a padding of 10 pixels, maybe 15. Let's add just 10. Okay. The forecast, I don't like its position. I would like to set it to text align to left. Okay. Forecast, the title, left line. Also the padding for our forecast. It's gonna be 15 pixels or 10 pixels. Okay. Now the other thing that I don't like is the fact that this is overflowing. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go to our items. Yep, our items, and that's gonna contain multiple items. And we're gonna do an overflow Y of scroll, right? An overflow of X is not gonna have. Actually, it's the overflow X scroll and the overflow Y. We're not gonna set that. Okay, for our forecast items. Okay, we got that. And let me see what else. I would like to add a little bit of padding as well for each of the items. Let's select one of the items. Padding, say 7 pixels. Yeah, that looks about okay. Maybe 10. 10 pixels, I like that better. okay, for each one of the items. Good. And also I would like to add a border so I can differentiate more as well. Let's try that. Border on the right side of each of the items, and that's gonna be 1 pixel, solid, and the color, I'm not a fan of that black, something lighter, and it looks alright, but I'm still not liking it. Let's get the same color that we have in the text. Okay, got that padding. I also want to add a margin at the bottom. Let's say 5 pixels. That's 10. I like it better, 10. We're gonna change this back to a lighter color. Let's stick it with the CCC hex number. Add those values. Okay, so one of the things that happening here is that our last element also has a border on the right, and we don't like that, so we're gonna define that using the last of type. So essentially what's gonna say is the last item, we want to remove the border right, and we're gonna set it to 0 pixels. We'll do that, we save it, and that border is removed. That's better. The other thing that I missed is to add the border to the whole forecast. This is looking square looking, I don't like that. So let's add the same border that we added for our current weather. I think it was 7 pixels. That's safe. Let's see. Something is wrong. It's border radius. Okay, and then we're gonna also have a margin at the top so we can separate these values. There it is. It's looking better. Good. Now let me see, there's some extra padding in there for the margin or for the title. Okay, I would like the margin of the top to be probably just 15 pixels, a little bit less than that. 8. Margin from the bottom, I think the margin of the bottom should be about the same. Yeah, that's a little bit better. That's for the title. Okay, got that. And also we could even install the scroll bar. And for that one I always forget about it, so I'm just gonna quickly search for it. CSS scroll bar styling. Let me see. Okay, yeah, we're gonna use the WebKit. Okay, so we're just going to quickly paste this inside our items. Okay, and we're gonna add the ampersand sign. We're gonna save, and we're gonna see this change. Of course, we can modify the color if we would like. For example, we can set this to red, although not the best, and you see that it's changed to red, the color. I'm actually gonna change it to the same color of the default, the main background that we have. Okay, there it is. It's a little bit better. I could also make it rounded as well. Let me select this border radius 5 pixels, And I think you'll have to add that on here for the forecast scroll thumb element. So I'm gonna select radius 5 pixels, and that got modified. The track would also set a radius for the radius of 5 pixels. There it is. It's rounded and it's looking much better. So we're gonna add these values in here. For the track and for the thumb. And we said that the border's radius was this. Good. We save and we refresh. So little things that I might want to change. This is a little bit big in my personal preference. And then this button, I'm not seeing the left side. Let me see. Oh, okay, because in our styles I had copy from the input, and I had the input has a border left of 0, and we don't want that for our button. So we're gonna change that for our search bar, that CS or SAS file. And I think it's still a little bit too big. I want to change it to the input to be 25. Okay, that's better. Okay, there you are. We got our weather application working. That's awesome. Let's start playing with different locations. Oh, I didn't like that. That's something that we'll need to fix it. But so far it's okay. That's sufficient at the moment. There will be bugs here and there. But here you are, just for you, your weather application built on React. Let's just start playing with different cities. New York, Boston, 29 degrees, kind of cold down there. Let's see, Mexico City, or Ciudad de Mexico. What else? Panama City. Whew, that was a long video, guys. Hopefully you got to learn how to build this weather application in React. It's a fairly simple application. If you are fairly new with React, it would be good for you to just get in the process of getting used to how things work, how you could just learn the basic concepts, such as how to create components or how to communicate between components, and also how can we make the requests to an API to get fetch data as well. If you like what you saw, please give it a thumbs up, because that actually helps a little bit. It tells me that you actually watched this video, or where this video was helpful for you. If not, please leave me a comment in the section below. I would like to hear from you. What can we do to help you to learn programming, to learn the front end, at least with React, and hopefully makes you a better programmer in the future. Remember, it's a process. It's gonna be hard at the beginning. It's just not easy to grasp some of these concepts. It's gonna be easy for some people, not for other people. Just take it easy, don't be hard on yourself. That was all for today, and see you until the next time, or ciao ciao.